welcome to our conversations. I am Bathandwa Kwababa, your host. Remember our promise to you of bringing diplomatic ambassadors, representatives and nations, governments and kingdoms and other organizations. Today we are bringing a special guest from the Holy See, mostly referred to as the Vatican City. Allow me to clear this upfront. The Holy See diplomacy is in essence and at its core that of a religious soul. At the apex of the Holy See is the Holy Father, the Bishop of Rome, head of state of the Vatican City, the chief pastor of worldwide Catholic Church. Many of you have guessed it right. Yes, the Pope, Pope Francis. Today we are hosted by the Holy See in South Africa, His Excellency, Nuncio Archbishop Peter Wells. I was looking forward to having these conversations because I wanted to hear and learn more about what the Holy City and the Vatican City offers to humanity at large. Many of you have heard of the famous Sistine Chapel and Basilica. Stay tuned to hear more from the Holy City Authority. About the Holy See itself, the Holy See is in Europe. It has a population of about 450 people. The capital city is the Vatican City, which also happens to be the only city. Official languages are Italian, Latin, French, and others. And of course, languages of the world are welcome. Their currency is euro. And the major religion, this you will all get right, is the Roman Catholic. Welcome, Nuncio Wells, to our conversation, and thank you for having us at the Embassy of the Holy See in South Africa.
Bathandwa, thank you very much for coming to see us. You're most welcome, and your crew is welcome as well.
Thank you so much. I've been thinking as I was coming here that, we have something that is scripted, but I just thought that I'm going to start here. The meaning and the essence of your title, we generally come across diplomatic representatives as ambassadors, high commissioners, and yours is that of the Nuncio. What is the Nuncio?
Well, the term Nuncio it's a very important term for us because it comes from the Gospels themselves, and especially from the Latin. The one who announces. The Nuncio is the one who announces. And so the Nuncio is sent by the Holy Father as his representative in different countries throughout the world, in different places. And he is sent primarily to announce the good news of the gospel. So that's where we get that title from. It's a very old title. And for us, it has a twofold meaning. It's not only the person who is sent to represent the Pope to local authority and local government, but also the person who is sent to represent the Pope to the local Catholics and the local church present in that area.
All right. It's interesting how it is spelled as well, because it is Nuncio. And so I thought that we generally refer to the sisters and the mothers in boarding schools as nuns. Is that also derived from the Nuncio?
No, they're two different roots.
Okay.
A Nuncio, it comes really from the same word as if you look at the word announce.
Yes.
Announce is modified from the idea of annunciare, to announce.
Yes.
So the word, like in Italian, would be annunciare. And also in Latin is similar to announce.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it's come. Nuns comes from a whole different generation and development is from where it comes.
But I love where the origins of it, the announcing of the... And now, Nuncio, tell me, what is the role of the Nuncio?
Okay, the role of the Nuncio, as I said a little bit in the introduction, is based really in why we call him a Nuncio. It's a twofold role. Unlike other ambassadors, we come to a country to represent the Holy Father, who sees himself and who is, for us, the primary pastor of the local population, Catholic population in this country. But he also is here to speak for all peoples. And so when he sends his representative, the representative comes first of all as from one head of state to another head of state to be credentialed to that government. So the concerns that would touch most other diplomatic entities would also touch us, even though we don't have, like, for instance, any commercial interest.
So trade.
No, trade is not an interest for us. We're more, what I like to say is more pure diplomacy. We're dealing with the development of peoples, with human ecology, with human rights, with making sure that people themselves are sustainable. Not only their environments, but the people are. And so that is our function. So one of the interesting things about our diplomacy is that we come to represent not the interests of our little 450 people to this country, but we come to represent the hopes and the aspirations and the concerns of the local people. And we bring that back to the Holy Father, plus try to give those often who are without a voice, we give them a voice.
I see. So your role could be 2-3-pronged. There's an element of the humanitarian, which is very to the core of who you are. I understand as well there's an element of the church, that is the Roman Catholic in South Africa or in the country where you are representing. And this element would more be working with bishops and other activities relating to church.
Yes, but Bathandwa, the other role, the second part of the role of the nuncio is to act as the interlocutor between the Holy Father and the Vatican and the local churches. And when I say local churches, I mean, like, for instance, in Southern Africa, I represent the Pope for all of Southern Africa. We have 36 different dioceses, as we call them, which are jurisdictions. So they're like different regions, 36 different regions, which are headed each by a bishop. And so the nuncio's job is not only to bring what the Holy Father wants to offer to them, but also to make sure that what they want the Holy Father to hear, and what they need him to know, what they want him to pray about, or what they want him to speak about, we bring it from the local churches back to the Holy See.
That's interesting, because during the apartheid system, I remember the role that was played by the Roman Catholic, I would call it, because at the time it was very limited to me as a child, as a Roman Catholic. And I would love to know, what other roles or what roles did you play during that time? Yes, I'm quite aware of the education element, wherein I went to a boarding school. There was a Roman Catholic boarding school in the Transkei called Twele, and the many hospitals that are in that region as well, which is the healthcare facility. So what role did the Holy See play in South Africa during that time?
Well, as you know, and as you've alluded to, before 1994, the Holy See was very involved in the struggle, mainly through its local churches. If you look at the impact that the local churches had here on bringing the voice, especially of those who are so maltreated and marginalized, not only to the public fora, but also to other interested parties, you can't underestimate it. People like Archbishop Dennis Hurley, he was the Archbishop of Durban. His voice is still heard today, even though he's passed some years ago, but his voice for the underprivileged, for the outcast, his voice against racism, his voice against all sorts of
gender, women.
Yes, he was very much in favor of doing what we could to make sure that women were treated equally. And he has remained a figure. Today we have a number of institutions still named after him: the Peace Institute, the Dennis Hurley Peace Institute, but then the Dennis Hurley Foundation, also down in Durban, which does a lot of work with the poor, and also does a lot of interreligious dialogue in that area. So the impact of the struggle on the church was enormous. And the church's contribution to trying to bring the society out of those dark years was also an extremely important contribution.
Beautiful. And then what sort of role are you now playing? Because asking this because I'm seeing a whole lot of facilities, resources that way of Roman Catholic at that time, and looking at them, are you still involved in those?
Certainly. As you also alluded to, I mean, even though we are a small number of the total population here, we only are around 6%, but the Catholic Church in places like this has always punched a little bit above its weight to use a boxing terminology. And we have done so because of the mission we have of service. I mean, we are here to serve humanity, and humanity in general. And so the church from the very beginning, in these areas as throughout the world, has been very devoted to education, not only for primary and secondary, but also tertiary education. We've been very devoted to medical care, especially for the poor and the outcast. So you know how many hospitals we had at one time here. And still we have numerous clinics here. You also know how many schools we still run. Not as many as we used to, but we still have numerous schools throughout the country. But then also the areas of social assistance in general, the assistance we offer to migrants and refugees, the assistance we offer to people who are poor people.
Food security.
Food security is a huge issue right now. And you look especially in the last year with our experience of COVID-19, how many people have been placed very quickly in a problem of food security. And so we have throughout the country, and in fact throughout this region, through Caritas Internationalis, but also through our other Catholic agencies, have been offering social assistance, especially in food parcels, numerous food parcels and feeding programs that we're offering throughout this region.
I'm curious with regards to food parcels, because I've seen lots of organizations supporting in various ways. But looking at sustainability, how best can you sustain that? So how are you involved in ensuring that you're not only giving food parcels, but how best can we sustain and make sure that even if anything happens, people are capable, are able to do certain things on their own?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important point you're making. First of all, we have to get people to a point where they can even do something on their own. And a lot of times the support that we are offering in the way of food parcels is just a bridge. But we've all heard the expression, if you want to help a man to feed himself, don't just give him fish, but give him a fishing pole. But I think we have to go one step beyond that. You've also got to make sure that there's water. You've got to make sure there's a lake. And you've got to make sure there are fish in the lake. If those things aren't available, it doesn't matter if you have a fishing pole or not.
So the tools matter.
So the tools matter, but also to make sure that there is a substructure, an infrastructure, social awareness of such that people are able to do the fishing. So that they have at their disposal, even once they have the tools, the means to feed themselves. And this is something that we're seeing now. I think COVID-19 has exacerbated our resources across the board. And I think that's why the Holy See, in a lot of our work, you'll know, we talk a lot about the environment. We talk a lot about ecology.
Ecology, absolutely.
And we talk a lot about development of peoples. And so much of that has to do with the fact that we want to make sure that the primary resources are in place so that once people have the training and the skills, once they have the fishing pole, there's also fish to be had. Beautiful. Which is very important.
That is true empowerment.
And the other thing, I think I talked to you the other day about this, I think it's important. We see this especially in a number of our smaller communities. Eswatini, for instance, has a fantastic program right now that they've been doing of where they're teaching people how to take a little piece of land and how to grow their own garden.
Yes.
So that they can, at least to a certain degree, produce the food to feed themselves. A lot of this, it's an art, and a lot of this has been lost because we're so used to running to the local grocery store, to the Pick and Pay, and picking up a bag of chips and a Coca-Cola. And that's
with a large piece of land in your yard.
That's it. But you know, the really important thing is to be able to produce for yourself, especially in times like this. And this is where this lost art, maybe for our generation, but our Gogos know that.
They know it. You just reminded me, there's a term we say in Xhosa, meaning that we need to go back to our roots. The way our grannies, our grandparents, even people of certain ages were doing this. I grew up with all these things in our big yard in the rural areas. There's plenty. So I love the empowerment element because that's what truly transforms a person. And as well, it's very encouraging to do things on your own.
Exactly. But you have to know how to. And the thing is that in some of our communities, I've even met some of these groups, the elders are more than happy to share. They love to share that information. In the past, maybe they felt like people weren't interested. But now there is more of an interest. And so you can bring them together and they can train these young men and women on how to have a little plot and to make sure that it flourishes.
All right.
And when that flourishes, so do they.
So this is now at Eswatini.
But also in other places here.
Yes,
and also,
you have a program that you're doing in Kokstad in the Eastern Cape, between Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal.
It actually, we are helping out with mainly in the Eastern Cape and DR and Aliwal North. This is areas, as you know, which are, they suffer from a lot of problems. They suffer from a historical exclusion in many ways in that area for many, many years, especially during the apartheid times. They suffer from water restricted areas. They're just drought stricken. They aren't areas that produce a lot anyhow, so you require an enormous amount of land just to produce a little. And the problem with unemployment there is incredible. And also it's areas where we see a lot of refugees and migrants collect because it's borders with Lesotho and places like that. So some of the things that we've been trying to help with is not only to raise awareness, but also to give assistance where we can, to putting centers in, to trying to help, especially young people, to make sure that they are fed, to make sure that they're taken care of. There's a real problem with a lot of undocumented people in that area. We do what we can to help get them documented. We try to do what we can to get young people into schools, because a lot of those children are not in schools. And as we know, for very poor people, attendance in school also is related to whether or not they're eating. And a lot of times it's the only place that a young person gets 2 meals, a breakfast and a lunch. And if they're not going to school, they're not getting it.
Out on food.
And so this is why we've really put a lot of emphasis in the past, and right now, especially during this COVID-19 time, of trying to do what we can to either come up with better and more creative ways and making sure these young people and even their families get the assistance they need, but also maybe trying to get ways of, if kids can't get back to school, making sure they're getting the assistance they still need.
I see.
But it's complicated there and not easy.
Wow, well done. And thank you so much for I'm sure it's very involving.
It is. And unfortunately here, I travel all over, but we have, what I'm very happy is that we have really good agencies in these places. The local bishops in those areas are fantastic, and they have wonderful staffs.
I see.
And the Catholic Church very much believes in the principle of subsidiarity. So what we try to do is to help the local community handle the problem locally, and we give them assistance as is necessary to make sure that they have the instruments they need and that they have the resources they need to address the problem head on.
I love that system. I love that system. We've ran all the way to South Africa and forgot that the Nuncio, who is the Nuncio? Where are you coming from? You've been in South Africa now for 5 years.
Yes.
And just paint a picture of who you are, and then...
Well, I'm just a normal guy I grew up in the United States in Oklahoma, in a very rural area.
I see.
And from a very normal family. I'm the eldest of 5 children. And I went to live in a very small community, a very small town, and grew up mainly around rural people. And I think in some ways I always say that's always made me feel more comfortable here in South Africa. South Africa has a lot in common with my home.
So you share some sentiments.
Yes, because the people were very much rural people, and there's a lot of things that we have in common in these areas. So I've found, even for instance, I come from an area which is very few Catholics, and that's kind of what you find in this region as well. So I'm very used to and very comfortable in cultures that aren't particularly Catholic. And so I have not found it a particular challenge, but also rather familiar to be in this kind of a setting.
You also are ordained as an archbishop.
Yes.
Yes.
I was ordained in 2016 as an archbishop. After I became a priest, I became a priest just to work in a parish like every other priest. But I was asked after some years at home, after 4 years at home, in fact, to go to Rome and study to become a diplomat. We run the Diplomatic Institute in Rome, which is the oldest diplomatic institute in the world. It was created in 1701. And it's where all of our diplomats are trained. So I went there and studied for a number of years, and then I was assigned to Nigeria and worked there for 3 years. And then after that, I was assigned back to the Vatican, and I worked in the Vatican for about 14 years until I was sent here as the Pope's ambassador.
I see.
So all of our nuncios are always archbishops. They're always ordained bishops. And so at the ambassador level. And so I was ordained in 2016 and then came here to South Africa.
I see. And then the Vatican City itself, could you please paint a picture of how it is, the Sistine Chapel?
Oh, the Sistine Chapel.
Basilica.
Yes.
Take us there.
Well, unless you've been there, it's a little difficult to describe. I think maybe for Catholics, it's the pinnacle of what it is to be a Catholic, to go for pilgrimage there. I guess very much like what it would be for Muslims when they go to Mecca. It's the same idea for us. Because the Basilica of St. Peter's, which is the center of the Vatican city-state, is where we believe that the tomb of St. Peter is. And the Basilica is right over St. Peter's tomb. So it's a great place of pilgrimage to go to the place of the Apostle Peter, Christ's Apostle Peter, who we believe was the first Pope, and to be present together with all those who've come there for the last 2,000 years almost to visit that site. The presence is special. And then, of course, it's where the Pope is. And the Pope for us is the head of our church. He's our primary pastor. We refer to him as the Vicar of Christ because we believe that he speaks in such a way that makes Christ present to us all every day. And so for a Catholic, it is a particularly special place. But even for anyone who's not Catholic, because it is, as we know, filled with art. You mentioned the Sistine Chapel a few times, Michelangelo's masterpiece, a chapel that is filled with frescoes of Michelangelo. But at every corner, there's another jewel in the Vatican. There's not a place in the Vatican that isn't of particular interest, either historically or artistically. And so it is a great, I think, gift of the human patrimony that we hope all people can share in.
It's a profound heritage.
Yes.
And the significance of the Divine Mother, Mother Mary.
Yes.
What is it?
Well, Mary for us, of course, is the Mother of God, the Mother of Jesus. We believe Jesus is God. And so we believe that she intercedes for us on a daily basis. That the Catholic Church believes that when someone, whenever we pass on, we don't stop praying. We believe we still pray. We pray here on earth and we pray in heaven. And so we know that Mary is in heaven praying for us. And so this is one of the reasons why because we believe that as all mothers, she has the ear of her son. So if you need something special, you ask your mom and she'll say something.
I like that.
It's the same thing for us. We ask for her to intercede. There's a lot of confusion sometimes that the Catholics worship. We do not worship Mary at all. We believe that she is the mother of our Lord, and that as that, and as a woman who was incredible in her life and in her death is an incredible saint who lives forever with her son in heaven, and who is constantly interceding for us because she loves the children. She loves her children, and we're all her children.
I love that. I think another picture next to the Divine Mother.
It's nice, isn't it?
Excellent.
It's a beautiful statue.
Is it consecrated?
Sure, it was when they did the chapel, they blessed it as well.
And the representation of the Catholic in India, how is it? Is there?
Pardon? The
representation of Catholic in India?
How many Catholics are
Is
there?
there? No, I'm asking if there is a representation
Oh, yes,
of Catholic
absolutely.
in
There's
India.
a Nuncio is there as well.
Oh. And then in terms of the population, are the people that are Catholics, or it's a small population?
It's well, India is so big that it's like over 20 million. But it's just a small percentage. But the fact that the country is so large, even a small percentage makes for a lot of numbers.
1.4 billion people, the population?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. 20 million is
It's huge.
Like another
It's a lot of people.
I'm sure those are really concentrated now.
Yes, I think that's a difficult place. India is a difficult place. There's so many different cultures, so many different things that come together. It's so old too. Very old culture.
For someone wishing to travel to the Vatican City, either to study, of course, tourism and studying are two different things. So how would that go about?
Well, the Vatican City, of course, is an enclave. It's in the middle of the city of Rome, and so it's in Italy. So we really don't, like for instance, we don't issue visas as such ourselves. People who are going to visit the Vatican must have an Italian or a Schengen visa to go in to visit. The Vatican City has borders, but they're open borders. So anybody who's in Rome can come in or out in the Vatican City as many times as they want. There's a certain part that's closed off, but that's more like the business district where the office and things are. But St. Peter's is always open to everyone.
So this is where that 450 now are. And who
so
are
102 acres are.
Who are those 450?
Well, a lot of them are people who, like for instance, the Swiss Guard, who live in the Vatican, their families, some of their families live in the Vatican. A lot of them would be religious men and women who have certain jobs and their communities are located in the Vatican. And then there's also, of course, the Pope and some of his closer assistants, cardinals and some archbishops, etc., who have places in the Vatican. And that's about it.
Okay, interesting. Now let's get back to South Africa. What is your favorite place in South Africa? I know I've asked you this and you gave me some, but I would love for South Africa to hear it from you so that I don't say anything you didn't say. So they must hear it from you.
I categorize it in two things. If you want to just look at geographical beauty, there's hardly anything like South Africa. South Africa is, as we say, sui generis in Latin. It's unique. The beauty of a place like Cape Town, which I think is extraordinary, and probably there are very few places in the world that, topographically speaking, have this extraordinary beauty that you find in a very small area around Cape Town. But then you go to places like the Karoo to see the desert. You go to the Eastern Cape. The Eastern Cape, I think, is one of the most beautiful places in the world because of the huge skies and those plateaus. The landscape is otherworldly almost. You go to a place like outside Kokstad, you could think you're in Ireland. You go to places like also in Mpumalanga, you think you're in Ireland in certain places. Limpopo, you go to Kruger Park, there's nothing like Kruger Park. But this is talking about the aesthetic beauty. The real beauty of this country are the people. And
when you said that the other day, I was like,
well, it's true though. It's very true. This country, there's so many different peoples here, but the way they come together and the expression and love of life and love of others, as we say in Ubuntu, the Ubuntu culture here is present. And I think that some of the most beautiful places in South Africa are, for instance, in the townships. When you go to the townships, if you go to Mass in a township, you'll never experience anything like it. It is a celebration. It's a celebration. And the people there are so happy to be with one another and so happy to express their faith and also oftentimes their pride for who they are and their country and their backgrounds. It is a unique experience. And for me, I always say those are the most beautiful places in South Africa. Anytime I have a visitor, I always make sure that they at least experience Mass once in a township, and often more than once.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I nearly cried the other day when you said the people. because South Africa generally is looked in a racial divide, so to speak, and from both various groups in South Africa, and to hear of this element, which is the reality and the essence of the people of South Africa. They are indeed that way. But if you have not experienced the places where the majority of the people are, one might miss that essence.
Absolutely.
You know, if you visit your tourist sites only and not experience the people, then, but I truly appreciate.
I always tell the ambassador, you know, a lot of times when a new ambassador will arrive, we have a kind of a custom, you make visitations to certain ambassadors to make a courtesy call. And so I often receive ambassadors in a courtesy call. And one of the first things I always tell them is that if you really want the pulse of this country, politically, socially, and culturally, you can't go to the shopping mall in downtown Pretoria. You go to the township, go to Mamelodi. That's where you will really see what's happening on so many different levels.
2020, February, March, South Africa, just like many other countries of the world, was also hit by the coronavirus. And there are a number of lessons and ills that were highlighted by the arrival of COVID in South Africa. As the church, what sort of experiences were you faced with?
Well, we had a number of challenges, as so many others did. When everything closed down, one of the things we found is that we did not have, for instance, the contributions that we normally received as a church. So it put us in a real financial straits to begin with. At the same time, we had requests for more assistance than normal, especially for social assistance, whether it was through our clinics or our feeding centers, our schools. So we had to dig deep to find the resources that we needed to try to assist people. As we know, this entire COVID-19 situation has exacerbated so many of the problems we already saw here. And I would like to mention in particular the problems with gender violence, for instance. We all know that gender violence is a terrible, terrible problem, especially in our region, everywhere, but particularly in our region. And with people that were locked down and locked in together, we saw this exaggerated in many ways. And what was going on was really unthinkable, and it's still unthinkable. So I think what it did is it heightened the level of our consciousness to this issue. I think a lot more people were speaking out on, but we also have to do much more concretely to make sure that people, that especially our young men, are trained and formed in a special way, in a specific way, I would like to say, of how they must treat women, how they must treat children, how they must treat each other.
It starts with the self.
Exactly.
It starts with the self.
And the other thing that we saw, I think, very much in this period is we already are suffering from a lot of problems with HIV/AIDS in this area. And because of the lockdown situation and also the limited resources, a lot of people, they did not avail themselves to what was available, especially regarding antiretrovirals, etc. So we saw an increase not only in infection rates, it seems like, but also a crisis in treatment because people weren't going to pick up their meds or were afraid or whatever the case may be. So these were all problems as well. Unemployment has exploded in this period of time. We already had a crisis, but the crisis is much worse. And then, of course, besides the food security that we've already talked about at length, it seems to me that another problem was the problem with refugees and migrants. We had a lot of people who found themselves stuck here. They couldn't get out. And it was a very difficult problem of how to assist these people appropriately. And I think a lot of people were marginalized during that time. I also think one of our concerns always is the environment. And it seems to me that during this period, even though I think our greenhouse gases, by the fact that we were locked in, they dropped. But still, I'm not so sure that people were as conscious of what we need to be doing to make sure that we are still taking care of our common home, as we like to call it. And so hopefully, though, what the COVID-19 has done is reminded us of these issues. And once we start moving out of this phase, we will be able to address these issues much more concretely and in a head-on fashion.
What sort of legacy do you want to leave in South Africa?
Oh, my intention is to leave no legacy as such. The legacy is here. The people are the legacy. It's not me. What I'm here to do, and what our Holy Father, Pope Francis, talks about all the time, we're here to serve. And one who serves doesn't leave a legacy. One who serves leaves a smile and a hug and a concern.
I cannot better those. In closing, I would like to invite you all to a prayer by a Catholic mystic, Saint Francis of Assisi. This prayer is the reason for my being. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, let me sow pardon. Where there is doubt, let me sow faith. Where there is despair, let me sow hope. And where there is darkness, let me sow light. And where there is sadness, let me sow joy.